Well, hello, everyone. Hi, and welcome to the latest Aurelian Coaching webinar. My name is Nicole Coustier, and I'm your host for today and for all of these. So if you're joining us, you know that this webinar is about relieving stress and relieving stress in a new way. So the reason this is coming up is because we are living in crazy times, right? And what I'm finding for a lot of my clients, and frankly, what I found for myself, is that the traditional ways of de-stressing are either no longer possible or no longer available to us. So for example, I used to love to go to the spa every once in a while, or I used to love to go hiking with a bunch of people. Um, or I used to love taking baths at home. Here's the thing. A lot of those options are not available to us anymore, right? Not under shelter in place and with businesses being closed, even temporarily. And some of the relaxation techniques that we used to do are kind of hard to do when you're stuck at home and you've got your spouse and all your kids and maybe, grandparents at home or whatever it may be. Okay, so it might be a little bit harder to get the time alone that you typically need in order to do some really good meditation or do a lot of the self-care things that we used to do for ourselves. Here's the other thing. Sometimes those types of self-care techniques or the de-stressing techniques, they don't work. They don't work for us, or they don't work without an incredible amount of practice and intent and time, frankly, right? So when we are in a situation where we're crunched for time, practicing meditation, it just may not work. There are just people with really, really active brains. And, to be able to kick down your stress to try and achieve, a blank mind and relinquish that stress can be just hard for some people with very active brains and just, an intensity to them. So whether it's circumstance or it's just not something that you are used to and know how to do, are there any other options for de-stressing in these crazy times? And the answer is yes. And so that's the whole point of today's webinar. Now, before I get to how to de-stress, alternate ways of de-stressing, I want to talk about a couple of things first, because these are foundational issues that I think will help you understand how to apply some alternate techniques to de-stress. The first is this concept that because of the crazy times that we're living in, because of COVID, because of coronavirus and the pandemic or the shelter in place, the lockdown, I've heard so much language around this. Whatever language you want to use or you've typically been using, that those circumstances are causing the stress that we feel. That is the first concept that I want to challenge. That the circumstances or the situation that we're in causes our stress. Okay? Now, it turns out that that's not the case. Okay, so a lot of people, they hear that and they're like, Nicole, you're crazy. Of course, the situation is stressful. The situation is causing my stress, right? And I want to point out that in other circumstances, right, what somebody might think is extremely stressful is just not going to be stressful for somebody else. That's just not the case, right? The circumstances that you find yourself in are actually neutral. they are what they are, right? And I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture, right? But there are facts on the ground, okay? There's a virus out there. There is a response to it, right? Cities and counties and states and the federal government, the global community is responding to it. But that in and of itself can't generate any sort of emotion, whether it's stress or concern or worry or fear. The circumstances in and of themselves don't cause any stress or any other emotion. Okay. There's a step in between, and that is whatever the circumstance is that you find yourself in, you have to interpret it. You have to make it mean something in order for you to feel an emotion. In order for you to feel the stress, you need to make it mean something first, right? You need to make it mean it's bad. It's bad. It's terrible. It's uncertain. Whatever it might be, there's a thought. You're layering meaning onto those circumstances in order to generate a particular emotion. Okay. There's no judgment on this, right? There are some introverts, okay? You may have seen headlines or articles or podcasts about this, where introverts are sort of like, this is my time. They're like, I've been readying for this my entire life. Are you kidding? I get to stay at home and be with my own company and, not have to be a social butterfly. Introverts are loving it. Introverts are like, I'm soaking up all my energy by being home and being in comfort and safety in my home. So in some ways, those people aren't stressed. Now they have the same circumstance. They're living under the same policies and the same global situation that we're all in, right? But introverts are going to be feeling a little bit differently than extroverts at this time. So I just use that as an example to show that the circumstances in and of themselves don't generate the emotion. Okay, everybody is going to respond a little bit differently. And that response comes from what you're making it mean, the layers of meaning that you are attributing to those circumstances. Okay, so that's concept number one. Okay, it's very important because as we talk about alternate ways to de-stress, you must first recognize that your circumstances don't cause the emotion. Your circumstances don't cause your stress. Okay, so there's a step in between. Okay, the second thing that I'd like to point out when we think about ways to de-stress is that stress is, think of it as energy flow, okay? A lot of people think I'm experiencing stress, right? And they're feeling it. They're feeling it in their body. They're feeling it emotionally, right? So they are feeling energy around the stress. And they believe that their solution is to stop it, cut it off, just stop. Here's the thing. Stress is energy, right? You are feeling it, right? Think of ways to de-stress as instead of just cutting off the energy or stopping the energy, you need to redirect it, okay? That is a better way of thinking about how to de-stress and mitigate stress in your life. Okay, so one thing that we want to make sure of is that when we think about de-stressing, instead of thinking of stopping, let's think about ways to redirect. Okay, so what I talked about earlier in terms of relaxation techniques, meditation, taking a nice warm bath, some people use exercise, right? Those are all techniques to dissipate that energy, You're dissipating, you're kicking down the level of intensity, right? And you are dissipating that stress through other, like kinetic energy, through exercise or through deep breathing. But basically, you're looking at ways to redirect that stress in terms of energy flow. It's got to go somewhere. It's got to go somewhere. So those relaxation techniques are typically a way to dissipate that energy flow. And for a lot of people, that works. And even for the people where it works, maybe sometimes you don't have an opportunity to do it these days, right? What I want to do is I want to contrast that with the situation where you're not actually dissipating, you're not finding another way for the energy to flow. And a lot of times this comes in terms of very unhealthy ways to deal with stress. So some people deal with stress by distraction, right? So what they're doing is they're putting their stress into a little jar and they're putting a cap on it and they're putting it on the shelf and they're going to binge Netflix for 3 hours, right? Or they're going to overeat, or they're going to overspend, all that time looking through Amazon and clicking through Amazon. It's so easy, right? Buy it now and click, done. Wow, you get this dopamine hit, right? Or over drinking. A lot of people are kind of joking about, I need another glass of wine, at 3 p.m., at 5 p.m., and it's just the way to get through. Okay. Is that really dissipating the energy, or is it just putting a cap on it, putting it aside, and distracting yourself from it? Okay. So, and I'm not saying that having a glass of wine is bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want you to put a question mark on how you're handling stress and just make sure that you like the reasons for your response. Okay. I want you to ask yourself, is this really dissipating my stress? Is it redirecting the energy flow, or is it just a distraction? Because if it's a distraction, what happens is when you stop binging Netflix, 3 hours later, what happens? All the stress comes back, doesn't it? Sometimes it comes back with a vengeance, right? It's like crazy because it's been capped and put aside, right? And not dealt with. Okay. So you have to ask yourself that question. So the first concept I want you to remember is that circumstances don't dictate our emotions. Okay. What we layer meaning onto those circumstances is what dictates how we feel. The second idea is that stress is energy flow, right? And healthy ways of dealing with stress, think about how I'm going to take that stressful energy and redirect it or dissipate it. And just distracting yourself from it doesn't actually work. Okay. So for different people, this is going to mean different things, right? Some people can totally drink responsibly and it's a way of dissipating because they're using the alcohol to then talk. They're talking to their friends, they're talking to their spouses, and this is a wonderful way to redirect some of that stressful energy. Some people are just drinking to get it, to forget it, right? That's a distraction because it's going to come back. The stress is still there. You're just ignoring it for a while, right? So I want you to be conscious of that. Okay. So we have some of the traditional stress relief techniques that have to do with dissipation and calming and meditation and all that kind of stuff. And then we have all of the alternate ways of dealing with stress, which are not really that alternate. What it's doing is it's just distracting you, right? Those are the unhealthy ways of handling stress. And typically, those are the two things, those are the two options that are presented to us, right? This is how you deal with stress. don't do this unhealthy stuff and do all this healthy stuff, right? And so what I want to talk about today is there another option? What if you can't take that nice hour-long hot bath and read a book if you've got your 3 kids at home, right? What happens if, you're actually furloughed, right? And you don't know when you're going to be getting back to work, and, gosh, meditation is just not working for you right now. Okay, sounds nice, but you can't get your mind totally blank. Then what do you do? Okay, so a lot of what I'd like to talk about today are these alternate approaches, which is instead of dissipating the stress and finding ways in small ways to let it out and let it out slowly, right? And relax. For some people, it might make sense to not try and kick it down or dissipate. And instead, if the stress is at a level of intensity that you don't know how to kick down, that another alternative might be to redirect. So you're not trying to relax so much as you are trying to find another channel to direct that energy, the intensity of the energy. So this is what I propose, and this is what's worked for me personally, and this is what I've seen among some of my friends and family who are very driven, A-type people who are just have really active brains, right? This, they love the idea of meditation, but just doesn't work, or they don't have the patience for it. That's what I hear sometimes. I love that idea of meditation, but I'm just not patient enough to meditate, which some people say, well, then that kind of defeats the purpose. You really, really need to double down and practice that meditation. But for practical purposes, right? Day-to-day life, one thing that you might consider is finding activities that are just as involved and consuming and intensive as whatever the source of stress is, but it's just something that's enjoyable instead. It's something enjoyable, right? Now, this is going to be different for everybody. Okay, but let me give you a couple of examples. When I first discovered this concept for myself, it was when I was in a high intensity job. I was working corporate. I was managing clients and managing people and managing projects, and my day was just boom, 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 boom. And it was hard to shift from work to home life, right? Because I needed a totally different energy at home. I couldn't bring all the stress and intensity of that work life to home. I wanted to be able to focus on my loved ones and not have all of the work stuff churning in the back of my head while I was at home. So what I discovered for myself was that there was a good transition activity for me, which was doing the New York Times crossword puzzle on the commute home. I was new to it. I didn't know what I was doing, and I sucked at it. I really sucked at it, right? But it was something that when I did it, it consumed all of my mental capacity. I couldn't both do the New York Times crossword puzzle and think about all my work stuff. I just couldn't do it, right? And my commute was an hour long, right? So door to door, it was an hour long. So I had enough time to say, I'm going to try this. And it was a personal interest of mine. I had done crossword puzzles before and enjoyed them and got an immense amount of satisfaction for them. It's just that the New York Times one was too hard. It was way too hard. So I always kind of said, just give up. I'm going to do the other ones that are a little bit easier and more my speed. So that's what I ended up doing. And a couple of things happened. One is every time back then I was using the actual newspaper. So I was folding up the newspaper. I have my little pen and I was doing it on the commute home. And it just signaled to my brain over time, we're done with work. We're done. We're done with that. And this is consuming me. And I had to figure it out. And at first I wasn't great, right? But there was an immense amount of satisfaction at watching myself get better at this. So it was a very rewarding thing. And then by the time I stepped past the threshold of my home, I hadn't been thinking about work stuff for a good hour. Right? Now, I don't think of the New York Times crossword puzzle as a way to like dissipate stress. Like, it's not a relaxation thing, okay? It's not meditative for me, right? It's a challenge. It's a puzzle. It's confusing. It's hard, right? But I was interested in it. Okay. And so this is a beautiful example of taking stress, and if you can't kick it down, if you can't dissipate, right, take that level of intensity and just redirect it to another activity that is just as intense. And what you find is that stress goes away. Stress goes away. The level of intensity of the energy that you're feeling is still there. It's still intense energy, but now it's redirected. So you would probably call it something different. It's not stress, right? And because you're experiencing some enjoyment and you're learning, okay, you get an immense amount of satisfaction. And it's not a distraction. It's not as though, you've wasted time, right? So some people are binging Netflix and they're like, they look up at the clock and it's like 3 hours later, and then they feel bad about themselves, right? Because it's like, oh, I wasted all that time, right? And here's all this stress that's still waiting for me afterwards. And so what I suggest is for you to find something that you enjoy. And this is something that, it doesn't require, it doesn't have to be a big new thing, right? So some people are like, okay, I'm going to take up watercolors. Okay, awesome. Are you really able to integrate that into your life right now? If you can, fantastic. Do it, because it requires you to learn something. It requires you to apply skill. It requires you to pay attention. It's not mindless, right? Over drinking, overeating, over Netflixing, all of those things are mindless. Don't do mindless, right? Redirect the energy to something just as intense, challenging, but enjoyable. And that's going to be a little different for everybody. So I have a couple of comments here. This is great. So people are asking for more examples. Okay, so here are some examples. What I've seen some people do, so I'm following social media on, just whatever the heck is going on. And a lot of people are taking up cooking. Like they haven't cooked before, or they're expanding their repertoire. Cooking is amazing. It's a beautiful example. You know why? Because it requires your attention. It requires skill. It requires your attention. It's enjoyable. Even if the process itself is not quite enjoyable, it's still redirecting that stressful energy. And then you have the satisfaction of having created something, having learned something, getting a chance to eat what you made. Okay, that's enjoyable. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of people doing that. And you have to put the work stuff away to do it, right? If you are working on challenging recipes or learning a cooking technique that you haven't done before, you have to pay attention, because you don't want to burn the house down, right? You don't want to spoil the meal. You don't want to burn the food, whatever it is, right? So it requires some intensity. I've had a couple of other clients who have kids at home, tweens, and they're like, I can't do it. Like, it's just so stressful. They go from, work stress to family stress, back to work stress and family stress. And there's nothing in between. There's nothing in between. And so we've talked about how to find family activities that people can enjoy that are a challenge, that require challenge. And for different families, this is different. But what I've seen some people do is, they've taken those crazy, like 10,000 piece puzzles, and it's just taken over their dining table. And what they do is, 5 p.m. every evening, everybody stops what they're doing. And the family comes and we figure out this puzzle. And we just work on it for 20 minutes, half hour, maybe it's a whole hour, right? Until it's time to start dinner. And what they're doing is they're taking their stressors, right? And they're refocusing that energy to a new challenge, a new problem, right? But there's the family togetherness. Some families are doing this. I was talking to the client the other day where she said, we started doing the puzzle, but nobody's talking. Nobody's talking. And at first she felt the pressure. She's a person who, like on a road trip, she talks all the time. She's uncomfortable with silence. So she felt a little bit weird, being with her husband and her 2 girls, working on this puzzle, and people aren't saying anything. And she realized that it is this concept of the intensity of the activity consuming people, and all the stressors of the day being redirected. That energy is being put into something productive, something useful, something around togetherness. And it's okay if nobody's talking. It's okay if nobody's talking, right? Some people are taking up exercise in a way they haven't before. Some people are taking up crafts. And again, this doesn't have to be like a big thing. It can be simple things, right? Some people are taking up reading. And what I found is, 3 things. One is, as it relates to reading, some people have said, oh, that reading list that I was going to catch up on all my reading during this lockdown period. Yeah, I'm not getting to it, right? So there is an element of this. You do have to prioritize it. You do have to prioritize the same way you would prioritize meditation and set some time aside to do that. If that's not working for you, okay, this is something that you would need to set aside to do. If you can find time to scroll through Facebook and lose an hour, you can find time to do a more productive activity for an hour. Calendar it. Calendar it with your partner, your spouse, your kids, whomever, okay? So try to prioritize it. And the other thing that I like people to kind of learn how to do is to understand that it's going to be, how it manifests for you is going to be different than anybody else. And that's totally fine. There is no right way to do it. There's no wrong way to do it. Okay. But remember, the conditions for this to work are the following. These things have to be met. One is, it's very consuming. It requires your focus. It requires your attention. Okay, so it has to be at a level of intensity and challenge that, the work stuff in the back of your brain and all the stress can't still be there. You really need to redirect all that energy. So that's number 1. Number 2, it should be enjoyable. you're not going to do anything if it's not fun. It's just not going to stick. Even if you think I ought to really do this thing, right? It's just not going to stick. So you may need to experiment a little bit. So make sure you enjoy it. The third thing is that it should be a productive, healthy, and usually it's a learning thing where you're improving skills, you're using skills that you haven't used before. So you're developing or refining skills, you're learning something. That's a very important third aspect. So keep those three things in mind as you experiment and think about how to redirect this stress. So I wanted to point that out before I talked about the reading, because the one thing that I've seen about reading is that people are either saying, yeah, I never got around to it, right? I have all the best intentions of catching up on all this reading and I never did it, right? So you have to prioritize it. The second thing is what they're reading, it doesn't fit all of those criteria, right? So it might be enjoyable, they might be reading all this fiction, but it's not particularly challenging, right? So it ends up being more of a distraction than it is a way to redirect the intensity of that stressful emotion, right? Now, if you're reading something to learn, right, that might be a little bit different, right? If you're taking up reading, you've been meaning to read, Brene Brown's books or leadership development books or whatever it might be, right? Those might be a little bit more intense because you have to kind of make note of what you're learning and how to apply it in your life, right? But the fiction thing can still work if, for example, it's like you and your partner decide to read a book together and you talk about it, right? So that's happened a lot. So it really does depend. Remember that this is going to be different for different people and you may need to experiment, but remember those criteria, right? That it needs to consume you, take up all your focus so that you are not carrying the stress with you, right? This needs to redirect your energy. Number two, that you actually like it. Like it, you can prioritize it, right? And that you're developing a skill. Okay. So this is the method that I found worked for me. It's worked for a lot of my friends and family members who are also have these very, very active brains. And, for some, listen, I'm still a fan of meditation. I am. I think it's great. And that, if you have the time and the space and the patience to do that, that's wonderful. You should continue to try to chip away at that. But I think it's interesting, see if this technique, redirecting the intensity of the stress that you're experiencing, see if that's a stepping stone to the meditation, right? You've been trying meditation for years and it doesn't really work because you can't kick it down. You can't kick down the stress. You've been thinking about it in terms of just stopping it entirely. So you want to stop the stress. We'll see if this might be a nice stepping stone for you. Okay, so let me see if there are any questions here. Yeah, because all these go back, add stressors again. Oh, so this is interesting. So I'm not sure. So one person says that all these go back and add stressors again. And I wasn't sure if you're talking about some of the distractions that I'm talking about, or if some of these techniques that I'm talking about is adding more stress. Yeah, if it's adding more stress, for goodness sake, don't do it. please don't add more to it. You're gonna have to refine this process, right? For me, it was crossword puzzles and cooking. It could be something totally different for you, right? It just, there are so many different ways that people have found to take up a new hobby, to reconnect with people in new and different ways, since in person is just not really an option at this time, right? So you're going to have to do some experimentation and see what works for you. If there's nothing that is immediately obvious to you, here's what I recommend you do. What I'd like you to do is get out a sheet of paper and just do some honest to goodness brainstorming. Okay. So if you are familiar with me and my work and my webinars, I've talked about this before, but I will mention it here again. And that is that true brainstorming is 100% completely unfiltered and 100% completely non-judgmental. Okay. True brainstorming is putting down everything that occurs to you, unfiltered and without judgment, so that sometimes 90% of what you write down is totally irrelevant. It's crazy, completely impossible, total crap. But the 10% is brilliant. The 10% is the answer you were looking for. Now, what happens is when you filter brainstorming, before you even write it down on the paper, you're saying, no, that won't work. So I won't write it down. What you're doing is you're not giving your brain permission to come up with the 10% of brilliance. It all has to come out. The crazy, irrelevant, just impossible crap, that 90% needs to come out in order for the 10% of brilliance to come out. Okay. So if you're having trouble coming up with something, right, and you want to try this technique, do the brainstorming exercise, and you don't have to do it for long. The whole point is to write. And just accept that 90% of it is just going to be crazy stuff. Like just accept it. That's fine. That's fine. Just write it down. This is for you. You can burn the paper afterwards. That's totally fine. But give yourself permission, give your brain permission to come up with all of that good stuff in the midst of all the crazy, irrelevant stuff. Okay. So brainstorm for just 2 to 3 minutes. That's it. Right? If it's truly unfiltered and non-judgmental brainstorming, 2 to 3 minutes should be it, right? And then see if you can do this. So the final thing that I want to talk about is that, our days are packed, right? So we get up, we may not have a commute anymore, but there's stuff that you need to do. There's stuff that's going on. You may still be working and have the conference calls stacked up. You got your kids and they need help and blah. Okay. Here's the thing. There is this interesting phenomenon that is new to this type of a lifestyle, which is the mental transition that we used to have to make from work to home, right? When I was talking about taking the commute to do a crossword puzzle, I was shifting from the work mindset to the home mindset, right? Now we're doing that multiple times a day. We have to do the switch because our kids are there, right? And you've got work. And so it's not like you have this beautiful 8-hour block of time where you can just totally focus on your work, and then you can take the hour to kind of transition mentally to home. No, your kids are like knocking on the door. Mom, dad, I can't, the video's not working. I can't get into my class. Well, I don't know about that. What is this? Blah, blah, blah. Or you're trying to get them to do the work, right? And they're like, I don't want to do the work. Whatever it may be, you're having to negotiate these shifts multiple times throughout the day, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. So how do you take those mental transitions? One thing is to take the technique that I showed you and truncate it. So that if you don't have the luxury of the time to totally consume you. You don't have the hour, right, to totally consume you and get you away from one mental area to go to another mental area. You can still accomplish this by truncating, right? And it can only take, it's like 30 seconds, 2 minutes, whatever it is. A lot of people do this already. You'd be surprised. So if you're shifting, right, if you have back-to-back calls or back-to-back meetings at work, don't you do a little bit of a mental shift before you go into the next meeting? You just mentally get a little bit organized, right? So that call that just ended, I'm going to put that aside for a minute. I'm going to reorient myself. What am I trying to accomplish in this next call? Before I walk in through the door, I'm just going to get a little organized. And what happens when we're shifting from work, family, and back is that we're not taking that time. We're not taking the 30 seconds, right? To just say, okay, I'm going to put this aside and now I'm going to focus on the other thing. It actually helps. So when you suddenly refocus, right, you're carrying whatever you were working on, you're carrying that right with you, right? And then when you're dealing with whatever the second thing is, and you're refocusing back, now you're carrying all of that with you. So you're carrying all of these things, and it adds up and it feels very burdensome, right? So I would just suggest that you just take a few seconds to just tell yourself, I'm shifting. I need to shift right now. So this work call, I'm just going to put that aside for a minute. My daughter needs me. I'm going to take a couple minutes to answer her question. And then after you answer that question, just tell yourself again, I'm done with that. She's good to go. I am now going to refocus. Just that little piece. What you're doing is, again, this is all energy flow, and what you're doing is you're redirecting instead of carrying and adding burdens and just layering one thing on top of another. What you're saying is, I'm transitioning, I'm redirecting that energy. And so if you have to do those little mental transitions throughout the day, try this technique and that might help as well. Okay. All right. So hopefully this was helpful. I don't see any other questions. Once again, Nicole Coustier with Aurelian Coaching. If you are not already on the email list, go ahead and sign up so that you can get notifications of these free webinars. I do them every few weeks. Go to aureliancoaching.com/email, sign up there, and I'd love to talk to you. The other option is that if you would like to have a conversation with me, I actually do 30-minute free mini sessions. So if you're interested in that, just go to aureliancoaching.com. You'll see the link to drop something directly into my calendar. And whether it's this topic, if you have questions, or if you're thinking about how you can apply it to your life, I'd be happy to do some brainstorming with you. Just drop something into my calendar and let's talk. Okay, so I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you at the next webinar. Take care.